Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me and in some cases see me okay. I'm Calvin Lee, if you don't know that, the IMAA Executive Director, and I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar today. I'm excited about the opportunity that we are being able to provide this offering to you today. It's very timely. The subject matter is very relevant to what we're all dealing with right now. But just before we get started, as always, when we have a meeting or an event, we should all be reminded of our antitrust policy as we engage in conversation and discussions, that we will abide by our policy and refrain from any discussions that will violate that policy. So just remember that as we engage today. Just a couple points. This is, for some of you, this is probably the first time that we've had a chance to engage since we've been dealing with this pandemic, and it has changed all of our ways of doing things, including at the IMAA office. We have been working remotely, as you probably know, and we've been doing everything that we can to continue to provide the level of services that you've grown to appreciate and enjoy from our staff. We're all safe and practicing an abundance of social distancing, but at the same time, we are moving forward with our regularly scheduled committee meetings. They have been going well. We had two this morning. Our safety committee met, and then our environmental committee met, and I think both meetings went very well. And we will continue to try and do those things. And then, depending on the amount of time that we are away from each other, we will look forward to interjecting webinars and things like educational opportunities like we're doing today. We have some IMAA in-person events that have been scheduled in the past. They started in June, like, for example, our Blast Institute, our teachers workshop. Well, that has been canceled. In fact, the university, IU, where we host that, canceled that one for us. We've got other events to think about, like, for example, our summer meeting with APAI that occurs in July. Will that move forward? No decision has been made on that yet, but we are very conscious of the challenges that we face as far as having in-person meetings going forward. So, keep your eyes and ears open for emails and our website and that type of thing, and we'll be trying to communicate on a regular basis. So with that being said, those are the IMAA commercials that I will start out with today, and we're going to get to the presentation. But Katie is on also, Katie Allison, our office manager, and she's going to engineer this webinar in terms of muting microphones and fielding questions that you may have. So I'm going to bring Katie on now and let her talk about how this is going to go. Katie?
All right. Thanks, Calvin. So as just a couple of housekeeping things here, I've already put a couple of items over in the chat, just kind of to introduce everybody to the chat feature. That's going to be used more for like general comments. All the panelists can see that. And I believe attendees can also all see that, as long as you designate who the chat message is intended for. So again, please keep in mind our antitrust, as always, that this is more focused around what the presentation is going to be on. There is also, and I'm not sure where it shows up on different people's screens depending on what device you're using, but wherever your Zoom settings bar is, there is a little Q&A chat bubble button where we would like you, if you have any questions at any point in time during this webinar, to type it into the Q&A. We'll bring it up to Greg. He'll be able to answer them live, and we can kind of keep track. And hopefully, if we do get a lot of Q&A out of this, that we'll be able to put together a follow-up document afterwards that maybe Greg can help with some more input as far as that goes, and be able to share that out with everybody. I do want to make everybody aware that we are recording this webinar today, and I do plan on posting that on the IMAA website once I get everything kind of edited together, make sure it all looks okay and sounds good. There will also potentially be some time at the end for some extra questions. And again, you do not have to hold your questions to the end as long as you're using the little Q&A chat feature. So Greg can answer those either during, or we can answer questions toward the end. There is a function where you can raise your hand, and that would allow me to see if you want to actually like speak. We may have time for that at the end. I'm not going to promise anything, but if you have something that you would like to say, you can raise your hand. We'll try and leave some time for that towards the end, and I can turn your mic on and let you ask your question or have your comment for Greg towards the end of that. And the final thing is that I do have a short survey that will appear in your browser once we're finished with this, so please don't close out of that window. It's like 5 or 6 questions. Just fill it out. It gives us a little bit of feedback about this webinar. We've only done a few of these so far, so we'd really like your feedback on how we're doing and what type of topics you would like to see. So with that, I'll send it back over to Calvin so that he can introduce our speaker today and get started with the presentation.
Thank you, Katie. Very nice. Now for the purpose for us being here, we have a great speaker, Mr. Greg Coker. Some of you know him. I've mentioned this webinar to some other folks, and they said, oh, the guy that spoke on the cathedrals. Well, I didn't get a chance to hear that presentation, so I've heard it enough now that I'm interested in wanting to know more about that. But if you don't know Greg, Greg is an executive management coach. He's an author. He's written a lot of books, and he's well known in our industry. I learned about him through the Kentucky Crushed Stone Association. Greg and I had an opportunity to be together a year and a half or so ago at a meeting of the state execs, and he was a presenter there and did a fabulous job. And I said to him at that time, Greg, I see us working together in the future. So Greg's going to present the program today. So hear ye him, Greg Coker.
Calvin, Katie, thank you all. Thank you for your association. It's probably never been a worse time to do something like this. Probably never been a better time to do something like this. I mean, as you all are experiencing, I'm sure the world's full of paradoxes right now. And it is an honor to be with you. What you see on your screen right now is what I call organizational health, sort of the umbrella that I'm working from. We'll talk about the 3 R's in a few seconds. It's personal for me. You know, the 3 R's traditionally were the reading, writing, arithmetic that I didn't always do the best at years and years ago. But the 3 R's now for me, and I'm probably sure for you, are, you know, reinvention, re-engagement, recommitment. And during these unprecedented times we find ourselves in right now, I found myself as a speaker, as a coach, as an author, as a husband, as a father, as a community member, as a church parishioner, to doing every one of those, reinventing, re-engaging, recommitting to what I do, and the why of why I do it, the cathedral that Calvin talked about a little bit earlier. So thank you all for being here. It is my honor to be with you all, and I appreciate your leadership with Katie and Calvin and your association. So let's go ahead and get started. What you have, or what I have here, is the 5 pillars underneath the umbrella for me of organizational health, or really the development of the individual, the team, and the organization. My 3 pillars, but I added 2 more. Leadership, which I work quite a bit with folks like you on leadership support. And then the last pillar is the support under the books that I've written. I tell folks I'm an accidental writer. I wasn't a big reader. I definitely wasn't a writer. I've spent 20 plus years in corporate America. I was hired by a great leader and fired by a great manager. And that's what led to the first book on building cathedrals. But that's always been my pillars on how do I develop the individual, the team, and the organization. The 3 values that I just mentioned that are my personal values, I'm sure yours too, is the re-engagement, the reinvention, and the recommitment. Whether a leader in your company or your association, a husband or a wife, a mother, a father, a brother, sister, a sibling, a community member, the re-engagement. I've said all along, and we'll talk about George Bush later. It's not a political commentary or discussion. I'm a social scientist. I look at leadership from presidential folks like Obama, like George Bush, like what we've got now. Trump. There's some things he does that I like, and there's some things that drive me crazy, like everyone. But I've always said that 9/11 made George Bush a really good president. And it's not political. It's not Republican or Democrat. A crisis makes folks better very often. And I'm convinced that this COVID-19, there'll be more good than bad that comes from it. There are some probably decent supervisors as a result of COVID-19 that'll turn out to be phenomenal leaders because of the way they handle this. There'll be decent fathers and husbands like me that maybe have turned out to be great husbands and great fathers because I've had to recommit, re-engage, reinvent. So those are the 3 values that I personally try to live by, and this COVID-19's even driven me even more so with that. The presentation today, which goes back to that pillar of organizational development, is from chaos to order, leading through these difficult times, which goes to the next slide. Actually, I'm gonna jump ahead to one slide before that, is you don't pick history, history picks you. And no one asked for this COVID-19 crisis. Goodness knows we wouldn't wish this on our worst nightmare, any country, anything. It's been horrible. But I'm convinced that you don't pick history, history picks you. And I'm gonna be a better coach, a better husband, a better father, a better leader as a result of this. You don't pick history, history picks you. Going backwards a little bit of the slide before, as I start every presentation with an action plan. I'm pretty organized, but if my name does not get on an action plan, the odds of it getting accomplished are slim to none. Slim just left the building. So before we start, on the paper you have in front of you, I would challenge you to put the traditional action plan on your paper. The who, the what, the when. The who would be obviously you. The what would be maybe buy the book traction that I'm going to talk about. Maybe decide to do a couple of the exercises that I mentioned here. You may have 3 action plans. If you're the CEO of your company, you have one maybe for the organization, you have one for the teams you're a part of, and the individual, because obviously you are that individual. If you're just the individual, it may just be 1 action plan. So you decide. You don't pick history, history picks you. Calm seas rarely makes a skilled sailor. I'm a boater. I've had boats all my life. My daughter convinced me to take her and her friends to raft up on Lake Cumberland, Kentucky. If you've been to Lake Cumberland, Kentucky, it's like an ocean. And I've got a pretty big boat. It's an older boat, but it's about a 30-foot boat. It's real heavy. It takes a lot of waves. I wasn't prepared for what I experienced on Lake Cumberland for raft up. I thought we were going to tip the boat over. But I'm a lot better boater and sailor now because of those rough seas. I think that's the same thing that we're in right now with this COVID-19. Most organizations are overmanaged, under-led. And if you're familiar with Warren Bennis is known as the father of modern management, said that. Management and leadership, not management or leadership. Very often folks turn to management during a crisis, and that's very important. But very often what's needed during a crisis is the leadership. In crisis situations, like we're experiencing, most default to management, their comfort zone, to their IQ, to the neocortex part of the brain. And again, I make a living off working with folks on it's management and leadership, not management or leadership. It's both. But during a crisis, we typically resort back to our comfort level. What's needed now, in my opinion, more than ever, is leadership. In addition to managing the business, emotional intelligence, the limbic part of our brain. Now, this is not psychology. This is actually biology, which I'm jumping to the second screen here. Over the right in our brains, you have the neocortex and you have the limbic. The neocortex is logic. The limbic is emotions. And very often during a crisis, we go to the neocortex, the logic, how we handle this situation, which is very important. But what's needed, in my opinion, right now is the limbic brain to understand what your people out there are feeling, which goes back to the previous slide, is what we call the golden circle. If you haven't had a chance to buy the book, First Start With Why by Simon Sinek, put that on your action plan. It is one of the most life-changing books I've read. If you're on YouTube, Google Simon Sinek TED Talk, First Start With Why. It's about 18 minutes where he talks about the golden circle. What he basically says is that most folks start with what? You ask folks, what do you do? You start with what? But what he suggests is people are motivated more by the why than the what. And in the how are the policies we use. He uses two examples, one Martin Luther King and two the Wright brothers. And I'll start with the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, which basically responds for modern flight, they were more motivated by the why. They were high school educated. They didn't have college educations. They didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have really any money. They had a bicycle shop. But they were motivated, and people followed the Wright brothers based on why they were doing what they were doing. They wanted to have men and women fly commercially. That was their passion. That was the why. There was a guy named Langley. He was funded by the War Department for, I think, about $50,000. It was back in the early 1900s. That's a lot of money. He was motivated by what? He wanted to be famous. People didn't follow him as much as they follow the Wright brothers. People are more motivated by your why, your cathedral, based on my first book. Are you laying bricks? Are you building walls? Are you building cathedrals? They're more focused. People are more motivated by the why. Martin Luther King, the second example. Martin Luther King says, I have a dream, not I have a plan, which would have been the what. People followed and still follow his values and what he stood for based on the why. I have a dream. So what I suggest with leaders is first start with the why. And again, you've got, this is neurology, not just psychology. You've got the limbic and you've got the neocortex. Most in crisis situations, we typically go to the what and to the neocortex. And what I'm suggesting, based on the emotions that folks are feeling right now, is more appropriate for the limbic and the why. And what Simon Sinek says is, if you look at this model that we're looking at right now, it looks like a target. But if you put that in a form of like a megaphone, what he suggests is the why is the smallest hole. You're looking down at that target, which turns out to be like a megaphone. And as leaders, that's where you and I come in. We should be with the megaphone out there telling our employees, telling our customers, our vendors what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. We build roads, we build hospitals. We're in economic development, which leads me to the next slide, is the why hasn't changed. In fact, it's now been magnified and never been more important by you as a leader that we are more focused on the why. And again, this is not a political presentation, but look at this picture right here. When I think about a leader, talking about the why and getting out with his or her people, I think of this photo right here. Again, it's not a political, but George Bush after 9/11 was on that picture was actually accidental. He didn't know he was going to do that. He was on a rubble at the ground zero and grabbed the megaphone. But what he did for the country and for those folks right there is told folks, we are America. That image right now that I literally have on my wall, I ask myself every day, am I doing that? Am I grabbing that megaphone and explaining to my employees, to my customers, the folks that I coach, the why? And that's the question right now as leaders, are we having that megaphone? The how in our organizations has changed very often. And this change is indeed causing stress on our folks. The what for many organizations has changed. Here in Kentucky, we have distilleries now making hand sanitizers, factories producing face masks. So what are your folks feeling right now during these changes? Change is an emotional issue. These are the 7 dynamics of change. If I had you in a room right now, what I typically do, this exercise, I have everyone stand up, look at each other for about 60 seconds, no talking. They're very uncomfortable doing this. I have them turn. I have them change 3 things in their personal appearance. And they're like, what are you talking about, Greg? They turn around and they identify the 3 changes. Then I have them turn back around and change 5 additional things. They're freaking out at this point. Then I have them turn back around, identify the 3 changes. Then I have them turn around and say, change 5 additional things. By this time, they're really going crazy. I tell them to sit down and we debrief this exercise using the 7 emotions of change, the 7 characteristics of change. I think these are relevant right now with your folks, what we're going through the COVID-19. Number 1, people will feel awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious during these changes. And if I could see your face right now, how many would say they're feeling awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious during all this change right now? We all are. Well, guess what? It's okay to feel that way. A matter of fact, as a leader, very often we're focused on hiding our emotions and being the tough guy or gal, which is important. But there's never been a better time to say, folks, I know you're feeling awkward, ill at ease, and self-conscious. Guess what? I am too. I understand it, but we're going to get through this. So your people out there, don't discount what they're feeling. You're feeling it too, and it's okay to let them know you're feeling it. Number 2, people will focus on what they have to give up versus what they have to gain. What they have to give up is coming to the office maybe. They have to give up some other things during this crisis, but there's some things they're having to gain. You know, more time with the family, more time to sharpen that saw that Stephen Covey talks about. I'm not a huge reader, but in the last month, I've scanned a lot of books. I find myself a lot more committed to sharpen that saw. But during this change, your people are going to be focusing on what they have to give up versus what they have to gain. The key right here is you're going to have to sell features and benefits. Number 3, people will feel alone even though everyone else is going through these same changes. How many feel like they're the only ones out there that are going through these changes, that are scared at home, not being able to get out, not being able to... We all feel like we're alone, but that's the beauty of the Zoom calls. And I applaud your association, because a lot of associations, a lot of companies are sitting there saying, this is not the right time to do this. Well, it may be the best time to do this, because guess what? People are feeling alone and we have to get people together. How many have used Zoom calls out there for happy hour? You know, last Friday night, my wife and myself had happy hour on a Zoom call with my son, his wife, my daughter and her boyfriend, my mother-in-law, and several other folks. It was wonderful. It doesn't take place of being in person, but guess what? We brought people together. Your people need to feel not alone. Number 4, people can handle only so much change. Well, guess what? We're probably at that peak right now, and we're getting ready to hear that this may last a lot longer. Well, we're at our breaking point, but guess what? It's up to us as leaders to make sure that we get this change where it's more manageable. An elephant can be eaten one bite at a time. Most folks can handle 3 to 5 changes. If you've got 10 things you're going to change, maybe group them into 3 to 5. Number 5, people are at different readiness levels for change. How many out there have folks that work for you that are thriving during this change? They're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm getting more done here. I've done more honeydew projects. I've done this, where other people are really freaking out. Well, guess what? To manage everyone the same means to manage everyone differently. You have to be cognizant of the personalities of the people that you're leading out there. And then lastly but not leastly, people will be concerned they don't have enough resource. That's not the last one, the second to last one. People will feel like they don't have enough resources, which leads to the next slide here. And if you've got paper and pencil in front of you, connect these 9 dots using just 4 straight lines without lifting your pen or pencil or without retracing in any of the lines. Again, going back to the one before, we're concerned we don't have enough resources. This is the time to be creative. Think outside the box. The only way you can be successful with this exercise, that connecting all 9 dots, using just 4 straight lines without lifting your pen or pencil, is to do, guess what? Go outside the 9 dots. Because we've been programmed in definitely corporate America, but also in our family, is to stay inside the lines. Remember, as a child, even right now, if you've got young children, nice job. You didn't get outside the lines. You colored that great. That's wonderful. And there's certain things we never compromise as leaders. If you think about those 9 dots, safety, exactly what Katie and Calvin talked about, making sure we don't talk about any of the financials. That's things you never compromise, the antitrust, the safety. But there are very often some things we can do outside the 9 dots that's creative. The Zoom calls for your families on Friday night for happy hour. Maybe doing some workshops like we're doing right now. Those are the things that we need to be encouraging our people. Back to that dynamic that I just talked about, is people are naturally going to be concerned they don't have resources. And this is where we need to challenge them to maybe think outside the 9 dots. And then lastly, but not leastly, the 7th dynamic of change, if you take the pressure off, people will revert back to their old behavior. Once this is all over, there's going to be more positive than negative that came out of it, I'm convinced. But guess what? When we go back to normal, if we're not careful, we revert back to our old behavior. If I'm not careful as a husband, as a father, as a community member, I go back to the rat race without checking on my neighbors. I go back to not communicating with my employees. I work with a pretty big company here in Kentucky, and I coach 2 of their executives, and I'm talking to all their employees, and they're sitting there going, during this COVID-19, our top leadership in our company, they have never been more effective at communicating. Guess what? We're scared that after this is all over, they won't communicate like they've been now. That's a challenge. If you take the pressure off, we naturally revert back to our old behavior. There's certain old behavior we want to revert back to. We can't wait to get back to normal. But as leaders, we've got to make sure that we don't revert back to the old behaviors that wasn't the most effective. Guess what? As leaders, we've got to make sure we keep that pressure on to folks to sharpen the saw. And when they work from home, they continue to be as productive as they've been before. As leaders, we need to understand and appreciate and adapt our leadership approach based on the needs of our key stakeholders. And those key stakeholders are obviously our employees, our customers, our vendors, et cetera. If you've been in any of my workshops before, this is one of my favorite models. It's called social styles. What it basically says is that we all tend to look out of 4 windows of the world. Not that I can't look out of all 4 of them, I can and I do. But research says, and my experience definitely says, I tend to look out of maybe 1 or 2 more than the other 2. Most managers are driver analytical. When I was with AT&T in charge of our assessment center, you would not have got into management had you not been extremely driven and analytical. That's great. That's management. Expressive, aimable at the very bottom, that's leadership. And it's not either or. Driver analytical is management, expressive, aimable is leadership. Driver analytical is IQ, expressive, aimable is EQ, emotional intelligence. Driver analytical is the brain, expressive, aimable is the heart. We've got to be all 4 of these, because if you've got employees who are drivers, they want to know bottom line, when's it's going to be over? Bottom line, what do I need to do this week? Pop, pop, pop. That's what you need to give them. Analyticals, they're going to want to need more detail. What do we do this week? How do I do it this week? When's this going to be over? What are the key steps? The expressives like me, I want to say, oh my gosh, it's driving me crazy. I can't wait to get, well, let them express that. Don't tell them they're too dramatic. And then the aimables, that's the likability and the trust. And your aimable employees need for you to hold their hand, metaphorically, obviously. We can't do it with the social distancing, but guess what? You can hold the aimable's hand over the telephone. You can hold the aimable's hand through a little note, letting them know you're thinking about them, you're praying for them. That is huge. And as leaders, there's never been a more important time to be right there in the middle of that circle in realizing what our employees need. It's the old saying, if your favorite tool is a hammer, be careful not to treat everyone else like a nail, which leads me to your leadership style. If your favorite tool is a hammer, be careful not to treat everybody else like a nail. And that goes to the next model, which you're probably familiar with. That is the Ken Blanchard, Paul Hershey model on situational leadership. It says that we have 4 types of leadership and management. There's directive, pop, 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 let's get it done. Very important. There's coaching. Direction's more one-way communication. Coaching starts to be a little bit more two-way. You know, what do you think? Here's what I want you to do. What questions do you have? Eventually, you go over to the supportive side. How do you feel? What do you think? How would you handle this? And then the delegation is, listen, you know about this more than I do. That's your team. Take off. I'm here for you. Call me. I'm working from home like everyone else is. That's the delegation. But now more than ever, in addition to making sure you're working from the drive or analytical expressive aimable, it's more important than ever to make sure you're employing all 4 leadership styles. Where prior to this, you may have had I'm more of a delegation supporter. Well, that's great. But guess what? Your people need direction during this crisis. And I need to be more directive, even though my favorite style might be delegation. If your favorite style is direction coaching, you're going to have to trust your employees working from home. A friend of mine always says, how do you know if you can trust someone? Trust them. And I'm convinced the way we do business is going to be totally changed as a result of this COVID-19. There's going to be more people working from home. We're going to trust them working from home. The way we educate our children, we're going to totally educate them differently. There'll be more non-traditional days where they're maybe not in school on a Monday or Wednesday, where they're working from home with a computer. Who's to say that's all bad? You know, my nephew that's going through this right now, he's a senior. He said, Uncle Greg, I work harder and do more homework on these non-traditional days than I ever did in school. And guess what? My teacher's communicating with me a lot more effectively. I actually am getting more out of it right now. It's going to change, and we're going to be the beneficiaries of it. So let's go to the last part of the workshop on the stress management. As leaders, and for those that we lead, you have to take care of you. You know, my wife's a flight attendant. And when you fly, and I fly quite a bit with my wife, she'll stand up there with a seatbelt, but she'll also say, in the unlikely event there's a decrease in cabin pressure, what happens? The oxygen mask comes down. Who does she say, or who does he say to put it on first? You. You've got to take care of you as a leader before you can lead and manage other people. And very often, because of your personality, to your credit, you're out there putting the oxygen mask metaphorically on everybody else out there. You've got to take care of you. But guess what? We've got to take care of the people we're leading as well. So that goes to Dr. Raymond Flannery, one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called Becoming Stress Management. He studied over 1,200 women and men for over 20 years. The basic question, what were their specific skills and general overall strategies for adapting to and coping with life stress? What are the people like you and me that handle stress? Not that we don't have stress, we do have stress. But how do we manage stress? And he went over 7 characteristics, and they call them well-ordered souls. I love that term. Well, and that was actually from Aristotle. Well-ordered souls, folks like you and me, to handle stress. So let's go over these 7. Again, as a leader, you've got to take care of you, but also as a leader, we've got to help the people that report to us and that we work with, our family members, handle stress as well. Number 1, people like you and me that handle stress, they take personal control. They're empowered versus overpowered. They have internal control. They're self-initiated, self-directed problem solving versus waiting for other people to help them. When I got fired from corporate America, I cried, I was depressed, but at some point I had to say, I've got to lift myself up. I lost my dad 7 years ago. We still cry about my dad. I mean, he's in the cathedral right now in heaven. My mom at some point said, you know, I've got to get back in the ball game. I'm going to have my knees replaced. I'm going to get out there and start dancing again. And she did. Number two, people like you and me that handle stress, they're task involved. They're purpose driven. They have a reason to live. Based on my first book, they have a cathedral. At some point, you've got to get back to build that cathedral. And that goes back to the why that we talked about earlier with Simon Sinek, a person with a why to live. Number three, they make wise lifestyle choices. Regular physical activity is probably as close to a, quote, magic bullet, unquote, as we will ever come in modern medicine. Dr. Joanne Manson at Harvard. How many out there like me have found themselves going on nightly walks? I got my bicycle fixed. I've been riding my bike. I've been walking every day. Why haven't I been doing that before? That's the closest to a magic bullet that I'll ever come by. Modification in lifestyle could prevent or delay 75% of illness and disease. The other 25% is based on genetics and the environment, which we have very little control of. How many know folks out there that lost a lot of weight now that say, you know, I don't take my blood pressure medication anymore or my diabetes medication because guess what? I don't need to. I'm back to where I need to be. So number three is those wise lifestyle choices. Number four, they seek social support. Boredom and chronic loneliness was risk equated to a 1 pack per day smoking habit. If you're a lonely smoker, you're in big trouble. And guess what? During these times, number four is tough to seek social support. But how many have been inspired like I have with Facebook, with photos of a teacher putting her hand on a window of a child and the child inside the house putting the hand on the window? Wow, there's so many things we can be doing to seeking that social support and helping our employees out there being connected socially with a phone call, with a Zoom meeting, with a note, with a letter. The Brigham Young study that I talk about next this is done by Brigham Young. What they basically looked at is who are the people that live past 90 years old. All of these are powerful indicators and predictors from the very bottom: environment, blood pressure, weight, exercise, heart health, etc. What are the two most powerful ones? Social interaction, strong social interaction, and close relationships. And when I do this workshop live, I always ask folks, how many have a Wendy's or a Hardee's or a McDonald's in their hometown where there's about 85 old people eating breakfast and drinking coffee every morning? That's my mom out there. She'll live to be 100. And what's really creating a lot of stress in her life right now is, guess what? She can't get out of the house. She can't go to McDonald's or Hardee's in the morning. And we're having to go and maybe blow the horn and their neighbors write chalk on their sidewalk. But we've got to realize that the seeking social support is a key indicator of longevity. Number five, a sense of humor. Humor and laughter stimulate the immune system. It lowers our blood pressure, increases those endorphin levels, it decreases stress levels. Researchers discovered that on average, toddlers laugh 400 times per day. Adults only 15 times per day. Guess what? I have started to laugh more during this COVID-19. Last night, I walked in the living room. My wife was watching Caddyshack. Oh my gosh. I mean, I've seen that movie 20 or 30 times. I sat down on the sofa, was dying laughing at Bill Murray and and Chevy Chase and all those folks. You know, anger triples mortality rates, triples it. An idea is maybe have a comedy movie night throughout the week. What about with your employees out there to say, listen, we're going to get together and talk about our favorite comedy movies? You know, what an outside the box type thinking. Number six, religious values. Folks that are stress resistant like you and me have religious values. This is not a religious presentation. It's all based on research. Religious people tend to live healthier lives. Hospital people that were in the hospital who never attended church have an average stay of 3 times longer than people who attended regularly. Heart patients, 14 times more likely to die. Elderly people who never or rarely attended church had a stroke rate double that of people who attended regularly. Religious people tend to be depressed less often. No matter where you worship, no matter what TV program you're watching on worship service, I have found myself listening to church service on Sunday 3 or 4 times during the week. I've got a Bible app now. Why wasn't I doing this before? Again, it's not a religious presentation, but this is research based. I'm going to live longer. I am going to deal with stress if I have that doing to others as you would have them do to you, doing to you. Number 7, they're optimistic. Optimism is more of a worldview. Number 5, the sense of humor we talked about earlier is more of an emotion. How many had grandparents out there that said, "This too shall pass"? Raise your hand. After the fire, most folks, and that's the fire based on my first book, most folks report coming out of those fires better, stronger, and faster. Fear got us into this mess. Optimism, in my opinion, will get us out. And I have a t-shirt here. There's a company here in Kentucky called the Mountain Company. Some of you may be familiar. Katie, can you see my screen? Can you see this t-shirt now?
Yes, we can see it, Greg.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I have in front of you can see that on this t-shirt. I love this t-shirt. He sent it to the mail to me last week. Optimism, the strongest building material on earth. What a great t-shirt. And that's one of your industry companies in Kentucky, Mountain Enterprises, that put that on the back of their t-shirt. Guess what? They put it on there about 6 months ago. It just happened to be the most appropriate time to be wearing that t-shirt right now. How do you react? How do you ask yourself, how am I going to come out of this COVID-19? The next slide right here is a slide, I call it the re-engage, reinvent, recommit, and grow. How many have family members or friends that are still in that fear zone? You know, I've got family members that text me all this crazy stuff. The world's coming to the end as we know it. They're hoarding the toilet paper still. I hoarded it a month or so ago. They're doing all kinds of crazy things, but look at the last part, the growth zone. These are the folks like you and me that are finding our purpose, the why, the cathedral. They're thinking how they can help other people. They're getting out and saying hello to people when they may have not said hello in the past, like I've not. They're using those skills. They're in the growth zone. So again, I end the presentation with the action plan, the what, the who, and the when. And my challenge as leaders, and you have this presentation, I know Katie and Calvin are going to share it with you, it's been recorded. Use it with whoever you want to use it with. But what's your action plan to do as a result of some of the material that I've shared? I've got 3 books. I tell folks I'm an accidental writer. On my website, thegregcokerdevelopment.com, all 3 of my books are available for a free download. You've got time. I'm not a big reader, but I found myself in the last 30 days reading a lot more. A habit becomes a habit after 28 days. A habit becomes a habit after 28 days. If I can start picking up that book daily and sort of trying to sharpen the saw, guess what? After 31 days, I'm just doing it regularly. So my 3 books, The Building Cathedral, The Soft Skills Manual, The Healing the Wounds, The Forgiveness and Reconciliation of the Workplace, is hot off the press, and we have an audio version that you can download that as well. So Calvin, Katie, thank you for your association, for what you're doing, for gaining that traction. I'd like to open up right now. We've got about 15 minutes left. Katie, hopefully you all have some questions. I'm here for you all. And again, thanks for what you do.
Greg, before we get into the questions, we'll give folks time to chat them in. But let me say thank you for this presentation. I think it's a very timely one, right on point. We're all challenged with this at these times, and still trying to be leaders, still trying to maintain some level of optimism and some sense of normalcy, if we can find it. Just thinking about even tomorrow, is challenging, and how we're going to deal with things. So there was lots of great points that I picked up personally during your presentation that just really hit home with me, and I appreciate that very much, Greg. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Katie, I see some things in the chat box. Are they all from you, or I haven't opened up that chat box.
Yeah, they're all from me, and I don't have any questions in the Q&A at all. Again, if anybody has any, please use the Q&A box or the chat, whatever is easiest for you. If you would like to for me to unmute your mic, you can use your raise your hand option, and I'll unmute you if you have anything in particular.
Yeah, I think you know, a lot of the information here is going to be available to you. Also, if you feel that the need to have Greg talk to your people about something in particular, he's got lots of things that he talks about, including this again. And on the website, I guess we can share his contact information for you to reach him directly.
Yeah, Calvin, I've got 3 of these. The first one is from chaos to order, like you all have done. The second one that we've done with other companies is stress management, which we take those 7 characteristics and go a lot deeper. That's applicable to all employees. This presentation obviously is a little bit more applicable to leadership. The second one on stress management, you could open that up to all your employees, their family members. We had an association that actually invited family members because a lot of them are working from home. We're all going through the stress. The third one was on traction, gaining organizational traction, based on a really great book called Traction. The fourth one's going to be on teamwork, working with different organizations with the teams they have in place. So give me a call. Love to work with you all. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Questions, comments? I know there's a lot of folks out there. You learn more very often. Most often, you learn more from each other than you do from me. Throw some ideas out there, some thoughts. What grabs your attention from the models that I shared? There are other people, good writers bar, great writers steal. I just went out and did some research for you just to stimulate some conversation. So what grabs your attention out there?
Katie, why don't you just unmute all the mics and just see how that goes?
This is the participation part of the workshop.
Yeah, that's not actually an option on a webinar, Calvin.
It's not? Okay.
No.
Okay. So they'd have to request it.
There we go. We've got a question that says, do you recommend any online content to direct our colleagues to help with their management of the current situation?
Good question. I don't, if you Google any topic, leadership, I find myself Googling a lot of, before I do these webinars and Zoom meetings, especially on stress. There's so much out there. So I would just suggest just Google your area of interest. There's lots of YouTube videos out there. The 4 books, the first one I would grab is called 4DX, Four Disciplines of Execution. By Sean Covey and other authors. The book Traction by Gino Wickman is phenomenal. The book Start With Why by Simon Sinek is phenomenal. And that fourth one, what was that fourth one I had up there? Good to Great. Yeah, Good to Great, the bus metaphor. Get the right people in the bus, the right people in the right seat, the wrong people off the bus. And then my 3 books, if you're having trouble sleeping, they'll put you to sleep in a heartbeat. Go online and download those, the audio version as well.
Another source that IMA has compiled for industry-specific type options, we have a list of best practices on our website currently, where there's different links to different sources, such as NSSGA. The Indiana Chamber of Commerce is doing a lot right now for people to manage through the COVID-19 outbreak. They have a lot of really good resources. Several other organizations are doing virtual town halls where you can log in and listen to state representatives. So if you're members of like the Indiana Chamber of Commerce or the Indy Chamber, the Indianapolis Chamber, I know they're doing those as well, and we have some of those links on our website.
One sort of out of the box thing to do, and I facilitate this with different teams I work with, is watch a movie. Watch the movie Hoosiers, which obviously that's a huge one up there in your all's neck of the woods. It's one of my favorite movies. Watch the movie Hoosiers with your family. Watch it with your team. What a cool idea is to tell all your team this week, here's your homework assignment. Watch Hoosiers. They're like, what? Watch Hoosiers. Watch Hoosiers and pay close attention to the character played by Gene Hackman, Coach Norman Dale, of how Coach Norman Dale gets that team from form, storm, norm, perform. And if you call me, I'll give you an outline, some things to be watching for. How does Gene Hackman take the Dennis Hopper character, the town drunk, and rehabilitate him and give him his mojo back? There's so much to learn from movies. The other movie you could watch is The Bridge on the River Kwai. It's an old movie, classic movie, Colonel Sato, Colonel Nicholson. Which one did the best? There's a great book called Killer Angels. It's the movie Gettysburg was based on the book Killer Angels. Killer Angels looks at all of the generals, and you can debrief which general was the best, which one dropped the ball, why they dropped the ball. You know, take the politics of the Civil War out of it. It's a phenomenal book on leadership. There's so many things you can do outside the box from a leadership perspective while we're out there in this, it's sort of the unprecedented times we're in.
Okay. Well, again, Greg, thank you very much. We appreciate your time and your effort to present this today. And if there's nothing else, all this information will be available on our website, even Greg's contact information. And with that, I guess we are adjourned. This is the end of our program. Thank you. Be safe.